السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله حسين حسين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to both of you, to Sayed Bilal and to Sayed Zafar. Thank you so much for joining in this podcast. We are continuing the discussion on reform and different types of reform. And we have come across the issue of the youth. And many people listening may be facing that experience where Islam or the Ahlul Bayt or the Quran and all of these things are important, but they are not the central energy in a person's life. They're not the most important thing or the priority. And you might be listening thinking, well, I want to make these things more central to how I make decisions or to how I live. And many people look say, well, look, Muharram has come. It's a time now to take your deen seriously. And we hope that at the end of this period of mourning, I've made some changes which last for the rest of the year or indeed for the rest of my life. But that doesn't just happen automatically. One needs to will that type of change and what we call self-reform. So today's discussion is for those people who are young and want to pave a better way for themselves and see in Abba Abdullah inspiration for positive change in their life. Whatever that thing might be that you need to alter, we need motivation. And here comes Imam Hussain. But before we can look at some issues the youth face and how we can start to counter them using Muharram and Imam Hussain and all of these things, we go back to that word of reform, of Islah, which Abba Abdullah uses. So for the sake of our discussion, we need to know what this word means in the way Abba Abdullah intends it, to then know how it applies to, for example, the youth. So I'll start with you, Sayyid Bilal. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Reform, what do we mean when Imam Hussain uses this word and when I use this word for myself?
I know, so that's an excellent question, that what does reform mean when Imam Hussain uses it? Because words oftentimes have a context based upon the social climate. And we see today that the word reform is used in many different senses and many different groups. So the general sense, as you alluded to, of changing what is being done incorrectly according to a viewpoint is reform in the very general sense. But of course, you know, there are people who use the word reform according to their own readings. For example, if you find some that choose to do a postmodernist reading of Karbala, which has its challenges and problems. So the term, as you mentioned, Islah, is the term utilized in Arabic. And we find this term in Imam al-Husayn's famous wasiya, where he says to Muhammad al-Hanafiya, إني لم أخرج أشرا ولا بطرا ولا مفسدا ولا ظالما إنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح في أمتي جدي. That he says, I am not left to cause corruption or to cause problems per se, but I have left to reform the nation of my grandfather. And in the time of Imam al-Hussain, what reform really was, and that's something which we take from the message of Imam al-Hussain today, is that reform was to awaken the consciousness of the Muslim Ummah. So it's a point to think about, that just within 50 years from the death of Rasulullah, after these individuals had come to Islam by the message of the Prophet, just within 50 years, these individuals are gathering to kill the grandson of the Prophet. And that's a shocking reality. That is how separated they had become from the, prophetic message. And that consciousness was really needed to be awoken. And that's the steps that Imam Hussain took. And I'll mention that as an introductory point. And I know, Sayyid Zafar is here, so it's my role to us to, benefit from him.
Sayyid Zafar, Bismillah, if you just adjust your screen for a quick second so that the camera can get you to Sayyid Zafar. But yeah, adding to Sayyid Bilal, how do you look at the word reform?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi tahirin. Salam to you both, inshallah. And I think what is really important when we look at Islah and reform when it comes to Imam Hussain alayhi salam is he doesn't just say that he's going to do something. He tells us what he's going to do and how he's going to do it. This is very, very specific instructions from Imam Hussain. I'm always reminded of this every time Muharram comes around and we read this wasiyah again and again. And it's the level of detail from Imam Hussain about this particular area. So we don't need to second guess that. We don't need any scholar or khatib or intellectual to talk about why did Imam Hussain do what he did. He's already told us. And he's told us in such specific detail that there's no scope for any confusion. You heard the first part of the wasiyat from Sayyidina, that he says, I haven't done this for this reasons, but I've done it for Islam. And how am I going to do this Islam? أريد أن آمر بالمعروف وأنهى عن المنكر وأسير بسيرة جدي وأبي علي بن أبي طالب. So he tells us how he's going to do it and in exact way of what he's going to do. So he's telling us that, look, I want Islam. How is this Islam going to happen? Amr bil ma'ruf wa anha anil munkar. Amr bil ma'ruf, nahy anil munkar is the way to Islam. You have to, before you command somebody to do something, before you prevent somebody from doing something, you have to do it yourself, right? Once you've done something yourself, then only are you in a position to ask other people to do that. Or once you stop doing something yourself, then you're in a position to ask somebody else to also stop doing it. And then he says that when it comes to Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, you'll find that, especially today, there's people who will come with all kinds of different viewpoints about Amr bil Ma'ruf Nahy anil Munkar, right? And we see this, you are all on social media. We see this very common on social media. There's people who are acting in all kinds of strange ways and use the guise of Amr bil Ma'ruf Nahy anil Munkar to justify their behaviors and their speech and what they're doing and what they're saying, and so on and so forth. But Imam Hussain says that I'm not just going to leave it to you to guess what Amr bil Ma'ruf Nahy anil Munkar is. I'm telling you how you're going to get this as well. وَأَسِيرُ بِسِيرَةِ جَدِّي وَأَبِي عَلِي بْنِ أَبِي طَالِبٍ. When it comes to Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, there's only two ways that you can get this. It's either through the seerah, the life of my grandfather Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or it's through the seerah of my father Ali ibn Abi Talib. And any Amr bil Ma'ruf Nahy anil Munkar outside of this is not something that Imam Hussain is willing to entertain. This by itself is such a amazing statement and sentence that just by one stroke, by one sentence, Imam Hussain has wiped out the mention of every other person who, however important they or people might think that person might be, and said that these are the only two examples that I'm going to follow in order to bring Islam, in order to bring reform to my grandfather's nation. So this is really, really important. Now, when we're talking about Islam, it's not just I made up this idea of Islam, or I decided that this is how Islam is going to be, or for example, I saw, this thing is a problem in my society, so I need to do Islam. No, Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam's Islam is very specific. It's very, there's a clear example of what he wants to do and how he's going to achieve that message and that mission. And that is what Imam Hussein's whole stand is about. And the more that you reflect on these words, the more you get closer to understanding the personality of Imam Hussain, of course, and also what he's trying to do.
Yeah, so this is so important to know the difference between the actual intended Islah of the Imam and what others may interpret and posit as this is what the Imam actually wants, whereas it's not in line with the sources. And it implies then that if I'm like, a young person this Muharram going to the majalis and reading, it might be, easy to get confused with the true message of Imam Hussain, especially if I'm not a specialist in Islamic affairs, we're not been to Hausa. Like, it's not easy to know for sure what is my Imam's intention, what people's opinions about them. So the question then, and you said Bilal, is if a young person's attending the majalis or reading about Imam Hussain and it's really taking an interest, what is the considerations they should take to try to understand exactly what the Imam means and not try to confuse it with their own or others' opinion? How do we get to the Imam himself as a young person?
I mean, the key to get to the Imam himself and the ideas of the Imam, as Sayyid Zafar had mentioned with the example of this wasiyah, is through the words of the Imam. Imam Hussain was very explicit within his goals, that within this wasiyah, he lays out all of these different points that I want to reform the nation of my grandfather. I am here to, carry out the duties of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar. I'm here to follow the seerah of my grandfather Rasulullah and my father Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. So luckily now that many of these sources are available to see that what did Imam al-Hussein say on the day of Ashura? That what did Imam al-Hussein do on his journey from Medina towards Karbala? But even after this introductory reading, that does not mean that one is a specialist. And over here that, there's a combination of the role of one's own self-effort and the role of ulama as well. Now, I acknowledge that ulama are not one, unanimous viewpoint. There are many diverging views, and there are people who examine Karbala from different angles. But one needs to have that critical thinking ability to see that what are the different views out there, and based on that, come towards conclusions. So that's really the beauty of Imam al-Hussein, is that the movement of Karbala is a multi-dimensional movement. And there are many people who are able to understand aspects of that discussion based upon their own specialities and based on their background. I mean, one person who is, for example, interested in spirituality, mysticism, irfan, may go and examine, for example, the lines of the ziyarah of Aba Fadl Abbas very differently than somebody who is a muhaddith. And that doesn't mean that one is right and the other is wrong. It's just the angle of approach. And that's the beauty of the kalam of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. If I say something, my words are, usually one-dimensional. But when it comes to Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, there's so many different, facets that one can examine it. Just for example, that, since we were on the discussion about the goals of Imam al-Hussein, even if we look at the poetry of Aba Fadl Abbas on the day of Ashura, when Hazrat Abbas says, فَوَاللَّهِ إِن قَطَعْتُمْ يَمِينِي إِنِّي أُحَامِي أَبَدًا عَنْ دِينِي, that if you're going to cut off my right hand, I will always stand in the support of the religion. That's a powerful line. And just by examining this one statement, this one line of poetry, we see that Aba Fadl Abbas, who really is the spokesman of Sayyid al-Shuhada, that he is that door to understanding Imam al-Hussein in many ways, he says that, this stand of Karbala that I'm taking is to enliven the religion. Now, when we hear this line in the majalis, especially as youth, we may not have this type of reflection. So over here, one's own critical thinking, one's own reflection, it takes one a long ways into understanding Sayyid al-Shuhada. And this is really the Quranic methodology as well. The Quran in multiple places emphasizes tafakkur and tadabbur. Whereas tadabbur by many mufassirin, of course, there's a lot of different answers given. Tadabbur is to go to the ends of the affairs, that what are the consequences of this particular discussion or event of this Quranic verse. And tafakkur really is that what is the source and reasoning behind it. So both of these key elements, they play a big part in one, developing in their understanding of the movement of Imam al-Hussein. And it's a lifelong journey at the end of the day. Year in, year out, one really needs to be asking themselves that within the past 10 years, within the past 5 years, however many years have passed, that has my ma'rifah and understanding of Sayyid al-Shuhada, of Ahlul Bayt, increased, or has it remained stagnant? And that's something only you can answer for yourselves and I can answer for myself. And if it's something that's remaining stagnant, that maybe we need to increase our effort or add something new towards our regiment. And if it's something which is increased, then one should always be seeking to improve upon that.
This point about it's a process and it takes, over different years you build up on it. This is exactly the idea of it being a journey in knowing Abu Abdullah. You don't just realize it in one moment and stop. You keep developing your understanding. And
I guess I'll add one more point on that.
Go ahead.
This whole idea of process, it's beautiful to think that even the companions of Imam Hussain were on different levels of this journey. I mean, not everyone was Aba Fadl Abbas, nor can anyone, nor can anyone reach that status. But we find that, there are individuals such as the famous example of Hazrat Hur alayhi salam, who joins Imam al-Hussein in Karbala. Or you look at somebody like Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, he wasn't with the Imam. And it's actually stated in the historical sources that Kana Uthmaniyan, that within his views, he was inclined to the rulership of Uthman and that he was the legitimate caliph. And it's stated that as Imam Hussein is going from Medina towards Karbala, Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, after they leave Makkah, his caravan is going side by side with the Imam almost. And he is stopping on different halting stations or different parts of the halting station just so he doesn't meet Sayyid al-Shuhada. But Imam al-Hussein invites him. He sends his servant. Zuhair ponders. The wife of Zuhair says that, the son of Fatima is calling you and you're not going to go. So you find that the beauty of Imam al-Hussein at every moment of this journey was to elevate a person and to bring that progress no matter what part of his spiritual journey he's in. Imam al-Hussein is not just quote unquote to help those who are muqaddas and muttaqi and always in the mosque and all of the alamat of the muttaqi that we're accustomed to, but no, I've seen many individuals, they've had no connection with the deen, no interest in religion. The only thing they would do is come 3 nights of the year, 8th Muharram, 9th Muharram, day of Ashura. But those 3 nights of the year were powerful enough to change their entire outlook on life to where, some of them, they even changed their entire lifestyle and they came closer to the religion. Why? It was the barakah of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And that inspiration is something we try to take in every single majlis that we attend. So I know I kind of might have gone a bit overboard on the time slot to answer that question.
No, what you have done is you have helped me formulate the next line of inquiry, which is that wherever we are starting off in this journey, there is a role model in the ashab that we can try to copy. So even if we're starting on the complete opposite end of where we want to be, we have Hur, for example, and we have, like you mentioned, Zuhair, they are templates for us and they're signs that it's possible. And the last point you mentioned about some people coming to majalis and it clicks for them. They have that reformation and you don't always know how it's coming or when it's coming, but it just happens sometimes. So Zafar, have you seen that where someone comes to the majalis of Abdullah or their whole life changes or they go through that process just because of the love of Abu Abdullah? Have you seen it happen in front of you?
Alhamdulillah, I think I can say that there's many times where I've seen a person and sometimes it doesn't even take a whole majlis. Sometimes just one line, one experience, one moment is all it takes for a person to transform their lives. There are people whom I know, you would have not imagined that this person would say a prayer in their life, and now tahajjud with her, for example. So that there are amazing transformations of people due to just a word, a line, a statement, an experience at a majlis of Imam Hussain. And I think a really important point Syed has raised is that the majlis of Imam Hussain isn't just a if you like, an elite place for the spiritually charged or those who are already on the path. No, this is a hospital for anyone who's looking to get cured from their spiritual ailments. And I think that the biggest lesson from the story of somebody like Hur or Zuhair is not that Imam Hussain alayhi salam is that Imam Hussain alayhi salam is the bastion of karam, of generosity. You know, he's going to open the door to everyone who wants to come. The lesson, I think, for our lives is that we have to make sure that we are not judgmental when somebody makes that move, when somebody wants to come to the Majlis of Imam Hussain, somebody wants to change their life. So often you'll see, and I'm sure you both have seen it, I'm sure our listeners, viewers will have seen this as well, that there's a person who wants to change their life and they decide after a lot of struggle from within themselves to come to a Majlis of Imam Hussain, to attend that place, and they get or they face these snide comments, or they face these unhelpful looks or behaviors from other people, and that makes them not want to come to this place. So I think the biggest lesson from the story of Hur or from Zuhair or from other individuals is that if somebody is making that change, making that effort, then I need to help that person to feel welcome when that person comes to the place of Imam Hussain, because this is not my house. This is the house of Imam Hussain. If somebody wants to come to my house, yes, I've got a choice whether I let this person in or not. But this person is not coming to my house. This person is coming to the house of Imam Hussain. This person is coming to the Majlis of Imam Hussain. So, I say this often, and I'm sure Sayyidina will be with me, and all the people who have this sa'adah and this honor will say that if I announced myself that I'm going to give a lecture about, I don't know, some historical topic from 1,000 years ago, and then I got 1,000 people coming to listen to me, I'll say, yes, I'm an intellectual. Somebody is, nobody's going to come and listen to me. If I announce the topic, or 1,000 years ago this thing happened, come and listen to my lecture about this, no one's going to come and listen to me. People are coming to listen to me because of Imam Hussain, right? This is there's no two ways about this. People are coming to listen to the majlis because it's about Imam, not because it's about me, not because I'm the speaker, not because anybody is the speaker. That person is coming because this is the majlis of Imam Hussain. So when that person is coming there because of Imam Hussain, then it's imperative that that person is welcomed the way that Imam Hussain welcomed people into his side. So really and truly, that's the challenge. And this is not easy. I'm sure you've all seen it before. You've experienced it. You've seen it. Maybe at some point we were even part of those people who are judgmental towards other people. But as Sayyidina said, that I have to ask myself this question. That every time I renew this promise, this pledge of Muharram, am I changing my life for the better? Is this increasing my ma'rifat of Imam Hussain? Yes, at one stage, at one point, I was doing this in a rasmi way, for example, because this is something that my family do. This is something that happened, so I am doing. But at some stage, I have to reach that point where now I have got ma'rifat of Imam Hussain. Now I'm saying that because I have ma'rifat of Imam Hussain, because I know what is the value of this grief and this sorrow and this majlis, that I'm saying that even though I'm stuck in my house, I need to have a majlis. I need something in my life to connect with Imam Hussain. So really, this is the this is truly, in my view, the challenge of Islam, that if I can move away from that judgmental self and go towards that self which is welcoming to people who are coming to this path, then yes, I would be one who's saying that, yes, I've really understood the meaning of Islam, of reform, that I've reformed myself. I've identified where the fault was in myself, and I've used the message of Imam Hussain the story of Imam Hussain to fix that fault and move on from it. So if I've been able to do that, then really that would be truly the meaning of Islam, what Imam Hussain wants from me.
It's so great that people who might have these faults but want to change them, they can turn to the majalis to look for inspiration for that. Sometimes we know what the problem is, we just lack the willpower to deal with it or to find a way or a reason to reform ourselves. But like you mentioned, it can take a second. It can take one hadith, it can take one masaib, and the person just decides to themselves that they are going to change their life or change this quality of their life. In order to make this conversation more specific and about certain issues, I like this phrase that the Majlis was saying is a hospital of spiritual healing. I really like this phrase. It's a beautiful idea and a notion. If it is indeed a hospital of spiritual healing, Sayyid Bilal, when you look at the community around us, what kind of illnesses do you see in us that we need to heal? What are the problems, especially facing the youth, since this is the topic of our discussion? What are the problems which need to be healed in us?
I mean, there's many different issues, but I guess I'm going to dodge your question a little bit, if you allow me to do so. Instead of answering what the problems are, because I mean, anything which contradicts our own spiritual journey or goes against the deen is problematic. And ultimately, our goal of majalis, of our love of Sayyid al-Shuhada, ultimately, when we wanted to lead us back towards the deen and the ideals which the Imams of Ahlul Bayt and the Prophet have set apart. But really, what I want to kind of go towards is that why is it that we come to the majalis of Sayyid al-Shuhada and many today are not deriving that benefit which should be maximized? Now, without a doubt, everyone benefits in some form, but how do we maximize that benefit? So I kind of want to take it in that direction, if you allow me to do so.
Yeah, of course, of course.
So I think there are two things that really come to my mind from my reflections that are really being lost, particularly among the youth in today's world when it comes to their relationship with the majalis. Number one is the loss of adab and etiquette when coming to the majalis. And number two, the loss of understanding what the real goal and the essence of majalis is. So when we come to the second, the real essence of majalis and the loss of this understanding, we see many people today on many different extremities. For example, some will say that, these majalis should strictly be an academic pursuit. And those who say it should be an academic pursuit, why are you trying to only be an academic in front of laymen? Sit in front of ulama and be an academic. Sit in front of people who know the material and be an academic. If you research the history of majalis, this system of the mimbar being a position where ilm is given is only 150-year history. And I'm not saying that it's something negative, because this happened under the guidance and the advice of ulama, that they realize, as Sayyid Zafar said so beautifully, that there is a pull that the majalis of Sayyid al-Shuhada have that no academic lecture, no other seminar can have, but the majlis of Sayyid al-Shuhada have. Before that, the essence of majalis was found in the musibah, within the fada'il. And Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they would give etiquettes of what to do when you come towards these majalis. For example, we have many traditions of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, that there was a poet by the name of Abdullah al-Makfuf. He says that when I recited poetry in front of Imam al-Sadiq about his grandfather, Imam Hussain alayhi salam, Imam al-Sadiq was not seen to be laughing the rest of the day, and he would cry to the point that his beard was soaked in tears. This goes to show that the most basic etiquette when you come to the majlis of Imam al-Hussein is to come in halatul aza, in a state of mourning. We have other traditions of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, for example, saying that the one whom when poetry is recited, even if he cannot cry, if he makes the face as if he is crying, falahul jannah. And these are the words of the riwayat. It's not something I'm making up myself. So we find that there's a basic etiquette that has been there traditionally. Many of our parents and grandparents, we know oftentimes, especially growing up within, a household from the subcontinent, that, wear black socks when you go to the majalis, make sure there's no holes within them, sit from the beginning to the end through the martiya and the majlis, and then, stay for the noha and matam at the end. So all of these different, etiquettes have been there, but I do see that a general trend that a lot of etiquette is being pushed off, that, oh, this was just a rasam or a custom of our forefathers. But that's really not what the advice of the ulama is when it comes to many of these things. And, a lot of them have a basis within hadith. For example, I don't know if many of you remember that many of our elders, when you would give sadaqah, they would, for example, either kiss their hand or, they would make you touch the sadaqah and then kiss your hand. Many people I've seen myself say that, what is this? That, the Quran says, Islam says, go and give sadaqah. What is this, kissing of the hand? Is this just a South Indian or, a subcontinent custom? But, they'd be surprised to know we have a tradition of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq where the Imam does the same thing. And they said to the Imam that, why are you doing this? That the Imam would kiss his hand afterwards. And the Imam says, do you not know the verse of the Quran that Allah is the one who accepts sadaqah? I am doing that ziyarah of Allah, that metaphysical ziyarah of Allah. And, what that means is its own discussion. So that's the basic point that I want to go towards. There are many different issues, particularly within the postmodernist world, that were never there before. And as Sayyid Zafar, Sayyidina said so beautifully, these majalis are a hospital for the ailing or the sick. And our duty is that how do we maximize every opportunity? And by understanding the reality and the essence of the majalis and observing etiquette, this is something what we can do to maximize this, this curing process.
One of the problems we face if we don't do that is the majalis as an institution is no longer stable. So a young person might go and expect oneself idea and get something which is not used to belonging to this environment, if it's too academic, for example, or if there's no knowledge whatsoever, like those extremes. And they'll no longer trust in the majalis itself because there's no sanctity to it. Its heritage has been lost and stripped. And the sad thing is we might see less young people actually going to the majalis. And I think we have in some communities where they just don't go, or they go at the end only for the masaib, or they only go for some lectures and not others, because what has happened is they know that they're not going to get what they need from certain places. And what that means then is the ulama and the speakers and the organizer of the majalis should be thinking about how do we portray the message in the right way. Sayyid Zafar, I wonder, when you are preparing a majalis or deciding to speak to a community, do you think about what that community needs in your research? And when you present it to them, are you thinking of young people? Are you thinking of people going through these issues and trying to make the points accessible for them? Because it can be so easy to get lost in the jargon of the books and the language in the books to forget who you're talking to in front of you. Do you face that discussion in yourself?
I think that this is a challenge, or this is something that everybody who does majalis will come across at least in their life and think about whenever they're preparing. And it is a big challenge. There's no two ways about it. It is a big challenge. You have a cross section of audience. I always try to, if I'm going to, for example, a community for the first time, to ask them to find out. Sometimes people, like organizers of majalis themselves, don't understand what I'm asking. They're like, you decide, you may. I was like, I know, I will decide. But I want help from you. So sometimes they're not so helpful. You have to be creative to try and find out what are the challenges and what are the things that you need to discuss. There are certain core issues, obviously, which are challenges everywhere that should be repeated, need to be repeated, have to be mentioned time and time again. I always try to have a skeleton of my lectures, obviously in advance, and then as time comes close to Muharram, there's invariably something or another that's going on in terms of whether it's an intellectual development, there's a theological issue that is prevalent, or for example, some social issue that's being that's being discussed about. So I try and incorporate those things into my obviously there won't be a whole discussion about it, but as part of a larger discussion. And of course, that is something that's very key. I'm interested to note your point that you said, where people would disconnect from the majlis, they'll pick and choose, so on and so forth. These challenges are, of course, will increase. I mean, obviously, I'm the eldest one here. I remember majalis, obviously before the advent of media and social media. So at that time, if you wanted to listen to a majlis, you had to physically be there, and there was no other substitute to that. There was no live stream. But I think that also, as Sayyid Bilal said, regarding the taqaddus, regarding the ihtaram, the respect, the reverence of saying on the farsh, going there, beginning to end, so on and so forth. These things would become challenged because obviously, like for example, last year we were doing online majalis. We had to emphasize this point that you have to try and build that environment of majlis even in your home if you're doing a live stream, because it is very difficult to speak without having that whole environment. But at the same time, these challenges open up new opportunities for us to be able to put the message of Imam Hussain out in different ways. I don't think that majlis will ever be replaced in that way, but I think that these additional ways are ways where we can effectively bring out some of the the key points, if you like, in those powerful ways. But coming to the point about how do you or what do we do in terms of preparing or in terms of addressing those concerns, I think it is very important. I think then it starts from the top, that it's very important that communities themselves are responsible when it comes to putting those people in power who are going to make the decisions in our centers. Because it's not just about, I'm going to put this person in power, or I'm going to vote for this person because they are from my tribe or from my relatives or from my city or so on and so forth. But are these people going to have the best interests of Imam Hussain in mind or not? And secondly, of course, is then those people who come into power have the responsibility to become educated and know, to at least to a certain extent, when they are ones who are choosing the people to put on the minbar, that are these people going to be able to deliver the message that is required to be delivered. I recall back, especially with this whole challenge, as you mentioned, of different ideas, competing ideas even. I remember that growing up, of course, there were different challenges, not similar challenges to what we have now. There were different challenges. But at the same time, I distinctly remember, and I can recount even names of people who as a child, as a teenager, I listened to from differing viewpoints within our khutaba, within our speakers, within our scholars. And I really appreciate that of our parents, that they did not impose a particular idea or a particular way or a particular methodology on us by only listening to one kind of speaker, but rather listening to a cross-section of speakers who each in their different way and different methodologies would present a varying perspective on the message of Imam Hussain. And I think that that's really important. It's very easy to pigeonhole yourself into just listening to one kind of speaker or one kind of methodology. Sayed Bilal mentioned earlier that there are people who will present irfan or the irfani aspects of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and there are people who present Imam Hussain alayhi salam in an academic sense, and there are people who present Imam Hussain alayhi salam, for example, from the point of view of fadail and from the point of view of his merits. And all of these perspectives are important. It's not that there's one perspective is better. Not that we need all of these perspectives together to holistically listen to understand Imam Hussain. But if we restrict ourselves to only one kind of perspective or one kind of genre, then we're doing a disservice to ourselves. Imam Hussain is much greater than any genre or any style, whether it's mysticism or it's tariq or it's hadith or it's falsafa or any of these things. Imam Hussain is much greater than all of this. So I think that is key, that young people don't feel afraid to listen to different people from different backgrounds or giving different perspectives. I think that's important. It's important to vary those things to allow different kinds of audiences to benefit from those. And I think even speakers themselves should try to diversify and not just focus on one perspective or area.
Yeah, and when we say reform, we don't want to take away that diversity because our tradition is rich with perspectives. We don't want to prohibit those things, mainly because, like you mentioned, I can benefit more from another dimension of the same content from a different voice, and that can be the source of my reformation. So we don't want to take away. The issue, of course, comes when this is not being done in the right way, because young people are getting discouraged from Deen because it's too chaotic or it's too difficult to get a handle on things. And so like we mentioned, a multiplicity of ideas is so useful. It is from the perspective of the youth that young people actually need to hear Islam spoke from different voices to know which one applies to them. It's, for example, some people prefer to see a lecturer who's from your same background because it shows to you that the pursuit of knowledge is something equal to all people. That's why some people stress for the English language be promoted so much, because English audiences who might be bilingual want to learn the religion in their own words, in their own language, and with arguments which make sense, and examples which are useful. Majlis of Imam Hussain is one environment for that. And for young people, they are going to be going through many different types of environments in a certain phase of life. So university, maybe school, employment, the beginning of a person's job, and in general, non-Islamic society, secular society. And the majlis is like that haven or that safe place where they can just be with Ahl al-Bayt in an environment which is controlled and informative, of pure knowledge. Said Bilal, on this point about young people going to different places, different locations, why is it important they go to majlis for when they go back to school or back to university or back to the employment? Or what should they take from the majalis of Abu Abdullah to help them in those environments in the normal life outside of the period of mourning?
Well, you take first and foremost consciousness. What we see that really differs the side of Imam al-Hussain from the army of Umar bin Sa'ad is that level of consciousness. Because while both parties knew that Islam is the religion of God and Rasulullah is the prophet, one side was in a state of ghafla and heedlessness, And one side, because they were aware of the Imam of their time and the reality of the Imam, they weren't in a state of ghafla. And the way modern society is that it is engineered in a way to put us in heedlessness. Whether it is through the 9 to 5 struggle of life, the general busyness, whether it's us being constantly on our phones or social media, or living in this culture of, exposing every single detail of our lives to where if I go and have a coffee, 100 people need to know that what type of coffee I had today. And these types of things, oftentimes, they can be a distraction to what is our real purpose and our real goal. And we see this at every single level of society, even, if you look at, pedagogy in schools, or you look at, what our epistemological outlook is, many people will agree that modern schooling is just fact-filling. It's just giving information. It's memorization. You have a test tomorrow. Here's your study guide. Memorize 30 things. And what is lost is reflection. So the point I'm trying to make, that every facet of society today, we see, whether it's due to the pace of life, whether it's due to the availability of different, sensory inputs, we're losing the ability of reflection. And reflection is something which is key in understanding one's purpose. And what these majalis really do is they serve as that reminder. Ultimately, there are many different texts and a hadith to understand the goals of the movement of Imam Hussain. But one line which I have always found to be extremely powerful is from Ziyaratul Arba'in. And in Ziyaratul Arba'in, we say that, O Imam al-Hussein, one of your goals was what? لِيَسْتَنْقِذَ عِبَادَكَ مِنَ الْجَهَالَةِ وَحَيْرَةِ الدَّلَالَةِ. That you were there to free your servants, the servants of Allah, from ignorance and the confusion of misguidance. Now, as we know, ignorance is not always that we don't know information and we need information. No, rather the more complex ignorance is that deep down we know something, but we are not aware of it or we don't act upon it. So Imam al-Hussein's message really serves as that backbone of consciousness for one to go towards the deen. It should be viewed, as a source of inspiration, that when we have challenges and trials within our lives, the door of Ahlul Bayt is that door where we find solutions. And, going to the point about the diversity of views, there may be different things which are being said, but we need to recognize that when it comes to the message of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, there is a solution there. Just because you have not heard of it or you haven't reflected on that angle, that doesn't mean that there isn't a solution. So I think this is an important mindset, or I guess a spiritual backdrop to have when one attends majalis and they're seeking that inspiration from the majalis of Imam al-Hussain.
Let's say I'm someone, or someone listening is looking for that purpose that Sayyid Bilal is speaking about. I don't have my purpose yet. I don't know what I'm meant to be doing in life or what direction to take. And there are so many voices giving people advice about what career to choose or what decision to make, or what kind of family life to live. And there's so many influences. And having a purpose is, of course, a great thing because it guides one's decisions towards a goal. And many people right now don't have that goal in their life. And they're just doing a routine or living a life of repetition because everyone's living that life. Say, Zafar, here's an interesting thing. If someone's looking for their purpose and they want to know, like, what kind of person do I want to be in life? When they look at Abu Abdullah, what do they take from him in knowing what their purpose is or what their kind of life they should live? Because we're not in a position to go and fight alongside him in the Battle of Karbala, but maybe I can still take something from him for my purpose today. What could that be?
I think that there's so many things that we can take, but one that's very pertinent given our times and what we're capable of doing is, again, a statement from Imam Hussain himself, where he says that the greatest struggle is kalimatul haqq in the sultan al-jair. The greatest struggle is to say the truth in the presence of an oppressive ruler. Whosoever speaks that truth, whosoever stands up to that oppressive ruler, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would consider that person to have been a mujahid, one who struggled against that injustice. And one who remained silent or remained accepting of that, obviously would be considered, Sayyid Bilal mentioned Ziyarat al-Arba'in. In Ziyarat al-Arba'in, in Ziyarat al-Ashura, in Ziyarat al-Waritha that we recite every Thursday, we have three categories of people who have been mentioned or been singled out for La'an. Imam alayhi salam says, لعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت. La'an is on those who killed you and those who oppressed you. And of course, those people who killed you and oppressed you, they're gone. But now we've got this third category. وَلَعَنَ اللَّهُ سَمِعَتْ بِذَلِكَ فَرَضِيَتْ. Those who heard that you were killed, those who heard that you were tortured, and فَرَضِيَتْ بِهِ, they were pleased with it. They were okay with this. They didn't have any reaction towards the fact that the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ was killed or tortured or oppressed. So this faradiyat bih is all the way to the Day of Judgment, because any person who continues to be okay with this particular action, that person will be part of that line. So really, if I'm looking for my purpose, then I need to see the fact that, yes, if I'm earning my living, if I'm taking care of my family, if I'm doing all of these are things that animals also do as well, right? If I'm a human being, I have a greater, or I must have a greater, station in my life. And if I can't use my position to help other people, then there's no point. One of the things that is very prevalent on social media at the moment that is regarding knowing your privilege. I'm sure that in the woke circles, people on social media know and have come across this many times before, that you have to know and acknowledge your privilege, right? And privilege, of course, for just the benefit of those who are not familiar with this usage of the term, is anything that you have that you did not earn yourself, right? But you get a benefit due to having that. So, for example, a person is a man. Now, I didn't have any contribution in choosing to be a man, but because I'm a man, I have certain privilege in society over people who are not men. Because I am, for example, this profession, I have certain privilege in society that other people do not have. So the key and the real message from Imam Hussain is that your purpose has to be that you have this privilege that you don't do anything to earn, but it is making you privileged over other people. Are you going to use that privilege to help other people or not? Are you using that privilege to help other people, to help those people who are not privileged, who have, due to the accident of their birth, been condemned due to societal issues into certain things or into certain ways or in certain problems where they do not have that privilege that you have? So am I using that privilege for the betterment of other people, or am I just using it for myself? If I'm using that privilege to help other people, then I will find my purpose according to what Imam Hussain wants me to be and expects me to be as a follower.
I really pray that the listener takes that particular point on board, because when you have that sense of purpose, you feel like you are working for the Imam, and your activity and your energy comes from that goal. And that is such a more enlightened way to live than without it. It's a gift, I think, a sa'ada to have. So we pray that everyone has that. We're coming to the end of the discussion, so I want to ask one last question to both of you. And that's related to the mentality of the person going to the majalis, wanting this reform, wanting this change, wanting all of the good stuff which we're speaking about, whether it's identifying privilege or helping the oppressed, whatever it is, like someone who wants that and wants to know how to take that from the majalis. So this episode's going up before Ashura, and the one listening now might be thinking that the day is coming up and we're going to be mourning for Abu Abdullah. What should be the mentality of the person who's going to mourn for Imam Hussain, who wants that mourning to continue after the majalis? And how do we go to these gatherings and think about what comes next? Because on the one hand, we are so consumed by the grief of Abu Abdullah. When you're in that state, you know, that is the priority. There's nothing like the grief of Imam al-Hussein. There's no day like the day of Imam al-Hussein. And yet for us to be standing true to that grief, it should mean something in our daily lives. So I'll first ask you, Sayed Bilal, and then says, for the one going to the majalis, how do we make sure this lasts after I finish the majlis and go back home? How do I keep this with me when I leave?
Sayyidina, do you want to take this first, or shall I?
I'm going to be 30 seconds maybe. I think that this is a wonderful thing about grief, that when you cry, when you mourn, your heart becomes soft. It is more inclined to listen to or to change. So I need to use that mourning, that weeping, that sorrow, that matam, that azar as a springboard, that yes, I've connected with Imam Hussain on this spiritual level. Now I need to be somebody whom he would be proud of, what he expects from me to do. And if I have this love relationship with Imam Hussain, that I love him and I love what he stood for, then this love will compel me towards acting righteously and doing the right thing. So I think that really that's the way that I would say is for a person to use that azar to go towards reform.
That's beautiful. Sayyidina.
Yeah, so if I'm going to add is that number one is that, you know, these days of mourning for Imam al-Hussein, particularly the 10 days of Muharram, even though the remembrance of Imam al-Hussein is year round, we see a ziyarah on every occasion, night of Qadr, day of Eid, etc., is that these days really make us more receptive to the message of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And this whole question about how can we use azar to propel us in our daily lives, there is no contradiction between the goals of azar and the message of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Because when it comes to these majalis, at the end of the day, we hear about Imam al-Hussein, the message of Imam al-Hussein, and the message of Imam al-Hussein revolved around the deen of Allah. You cannot remove Imam al-Hussein from the Islamic context. Even when, you know, to make the discussion come full circle, Imam al-Hussein, yes, is a figure everyone in humanity can be inspired by, but that is only because Imam al-Hussein sought to uphold Islam, and Islam is a comprehensive religion. Imam al-Hussein said that I am reforming the nation of my grandfather. So in this sense, when one mourns over Sayyid al-Shuhada, naturally the heart becomes more inclined to the message of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And that's what we really seek to, you know, do within these days, that what we take from the majalis and our lives outside of the majalis, we want it to be in unison. You know, the Quranic verse, if you look in the Quran, I would ponder over the verse, وَكُونُوا مَعَ الصَّادِقِينَ, and be with the truthful. And when you look in the Quran, that what really is sidq? Sidq is not just saying truthful speech, but Sidq is described that one's actions are in line with his speech and one's actions are in line with their beliefs. That, to be honest in your speech and dealings with other is just an outward form of Sidq, but to be true to yourself and for your outward nature and inward nature to be harmonious, to reach such a state of tawheed, as one to say, is really what we seek in every aspect of our lives, and that's what we want. That for this lessons that we take from the majalis and what we do in our lives to come and we have a state of harmony.
And for the one now listening who asked themselves, yes, I am seeking my purpose and I'm going to the majalis and listening about Imam Hussain to gain something lasting for my life. These are not stories or just the past, but this is a potential version of my future which is of great success. And to attain it, I have the tradition of the majalis, and the way it's been preserved, as we've been discussing, is so important to preserve that function of realizing yourself. But also after the majalis, like we just concluded on now, that is where what we are gaining from it is manifested. So whatever change you're going in thinking, I wish I could implement, now's the time after you leave the majlis to actually apply it, to take on those demons and to meet those targets we have set for ourselves, whether it's in our spiritual life or in our general social interactions, or as we discussed in our responsibilities, so speaking the truth instead of silence. We take from Abu Abdullah. Helping other people, accepting, acknowledging privilege, and finding opportunities to redress the injustice around us. These are all worthwhile ways to spend our time, and to have Imam Hussain with us, for him to be our goal, is the most beautiful way of self-realization. But like we said, it just takes a second, it takes a minute, one ahadith, one experience. And so allow yourself to feel that experience on your journey towards your purpose and towards Allah Azza wa Jal in serving Him. Allow yourself to be reformed, and when that time comes, we pray for success for all of you, inshallah, especially those who are youth and who are young and who are trying to figure things out. I hope you find Abu Abdullah as the inspiration for that journey.